Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Patrick O'Brien, and we will be looking at cybersecurity hygiene, what it is, and how to implement it. And so, as we've seen, really in these past, year and a half, is that general hygiene and activities for limiting the spread of disease has really been more important than ever before. And in our session today, we'll be talking about that same concept, but much more from a cybersecurity realm. And what does it mean when we say cyber hygiene? And really, these are going to be those basic practices that all employees and contractors should be taking to help limit the spread of computer viruses or help make computer-based systems more resistant to cybersecurity attacks. And we've seen that over time, the exposure and the amount of automation systems that have been targeted by attacks has continued to increase. And so we're really seeing that a large majority of automation systems had this type of experience. And so in our presentation today, we'll not only cover what cybersecurity hygiene is, but we'll also look at what are some actionable steps that we can take within an organization to really start to improve awareness and roll out an effective program for managing and monitoring cybersecurity hygiene. And so today, we will be using the GoToWebinar application. And so if at any point throughout the webinar you do have questions, please don't hesitate to use the questions tool. We should have about 20 minutes at the end of the presentation to go through and address any questions. Before jumping into the content of today's webinar, I'd like to just give a very brief introduction on myself and also on exida. So my name is Patrick O'Brien. I am a safety and cybersecurity engineer at exida, where I've worked for a little bit over 6 years, supporting various roles such as process safety consulting. And so with my background in chemical engineering, I really started out originally doing lots of functional safety activities, process hazard analysis, traditional risk assessments. And over time, we saw that the control system element and the potential for attackers to get in remotely was really becoming a critical risk to industrial facilities as well. And so there was a natural transition to look at that cybersecurity element as well. And as part of that, I helped to co-author exida's book about implementing the IEC 62443 standard and taking a pragmatic approach to cybersecurity. I've also this past year been working as the project leader for a new Center for Chemical Process Safety book, looking at the intersection of process safety and cybersecurity. And so this should come out towards the end of this year, and we'll certainly be providing updates on that as well when it's released. Exida as a whole is really a customer-focused company, and we work with customers to help them achieve safe, reliable, and secure solutions in a number of different ways. And the first way that we do this is through our certification and assessment division, where we work with manufacturers and system integrators to demonstrate that both individual components as well as systems meet the necessary foundational requirements for cybersecurity certification as well as functional safety to the IEC 61508 standards, machine safety to IEC 62061 and ISO 13849, as well as automotive applications to the ISO 26262 standard. In addition to our certification and assessment activities, we also work directly with the end users or asset owners for lifecycle services and look at how these individual components and systems can be built into the overall facility and really make sure that organizations are achieving their cybersecurity, functional safety, and alarm management goals, really by tackling the toughest lifecycle problems and helping them make sure that they are managing those systems effectively. For our last area, we have a series of enterprise tools that we've developed to support lifecycle activities in functional safety, cybersecurity, and alarm management. And the Excellentia tool was originally developed for internal use, but we saw that our customers also could benefit from using it, and so we now make that commercially available as well. And so as we get into the meat of today's webinar, we will be covering three main topics. The first is why cybersecurity hygiene is important for automation systems and why this is really something critical that needs to be developed and implemented, and why it's different and say specific to automation systems. We'll also look at what cybersecurity hygiene is, looking at the definition and also diving into some of the core basics for cyber hygiene. And then lastly, we'll look at how we can effectively implement cybersecurity hygiene within an organization. And so for looking at the importance of cybersecurity hygiene for automation systems, we're going to look at three main points. The first is that cybersecurity incidents can have major consequences for automation systems and really have physical impacts that are distinct from traditional IT systems. And so that helps to make automation systems unique. We'll look at the unique challenges of securing automation systems and see how cybersecurity risk is continuing to grow for those systems over time. And then lastly, we'll look at the human element and we'll see how that tends to be the weak point or one of the weakest points in security for an automation system. And so if we start by looking at the consequence side of things, we can see that cybersecurity incidents for automation systems, because they are connected to physical assets and have the ability to change and manipulate those physical systems, really can lead to different types of consequences than for traditional IT systems. And so if we look at some previous examples of cybersecurity incidents, we can go back to the year 2000 when one of the earliest cybersecurity incidents was recorded in Shire, Australia, where a disgruntled former employee from an integrator actually compromised the water systems network and manipulated pump stations to lead to the release of hundreds of thousands of gallons of raw sewage to local streams, and really caused significant environmental damage and a high financial cost to clean up the damage. We've also then seen the Stuxnet attack, which occurred from 2008 until 2010, where we saw sophisticated nation-state hackers lead to severe decreases in production and equipment damage for a nuclear enrichment facility in Iran. And so this showed, really the potential for physical damage was present, as well as the high financial cost of lost production or degraded product quality. We've also seen another attack lead to significant equipment damage in the German steel mill attack of 2014. In this attack, hackers were able to basically prevent a blast furnace from operating it in a identified state. And because of this, it was unable to shut down safely and led to really catastrophic equipment failure for that furnace. Fortunately, no one was in the area, but had someone been present, that could have potentially been not only severe equipment damage, but also a safety impact as well. We've seen cybersecurity attacks target critical infrastructure, and so the series of Ukrainian power grid attacks led to the first confirmed blackouts in history as a result of a cyber attack. And this is something that, again, had the potential to be, a very significant public impact. In addition to, the physical hazards, equipment damage, environmental, we have also seen cybersecurity attacks have an impact on safety. And so the Triton attack in 2017 that targeted a petrochemical facility in Saudi Arabia was specifically designed to compromise and render the Triconic safety system inoperable, with the ultimate objective of attempting to trigger a deadly explosion. And so fortunately, the attackers did not identify the redundant nature of the safety system and did not update the configurations for all of the controllers. But had they realized this and been successful, this could have been the first direct safety incident at a process plant triggered by a cyber attack. And then more recently in February of this year, attackers compromised the Oldsmar, Florida water treatment network and were able to increase the concentration of sodium hydroxide by a factor of 1,000 and get it to a state where it potentially would have caused significant public safety concerns had it not been caught by the operators or had that water been distributed. And so because of this, we have to realize that the consequences of automation systems being compromised is very high, and it's then critical that we manage all of the potential sources of risk, including accidental actions by employees. And so as we look at, not only do we have high consequences, but we also have growing risks and things that are leading to more frequent cybersecurity attacks and increasing the likelihood that an organization may experience an attack. And so a study found that within OT organizations for the last 2 years, looking at a period from I believe 2018 to 2020, they found that 90% of these organizations had experienced a damaging attack or some sort of cybersecurity incident that had led to a tangible financial impact. And so this shows that the vast majority of automation systems are experiencing these types of negative cybersecurity impacts. Additionally, we're seeing that the number of attackers that can go after and target OT and automation systems is increasing as readily available hacking tools allow even unskilled attackers such as script kiddies to compromise and cause damage to automation systems. In addition to seeing, a rising number of attackers, we're also seeing that automation systems are continuing to age, that we've got older infrastructure, and many of these systems have known vulnerabilities that can be exploited by attackers if they gain access and are no longer patchable. So there's no longer a security patch available to mitigate these vulnerabilities, which essentially means that the system is stuck operating with a security hole that cannot be mitigated. And then the last point is we're seeing greater and greater interconnectivity of automation systems, both for the process industry as well as in manufacturing and really many different types of industries, and a growing prevalence of remote access. And so with these changes, systems that were not originally intended to be connected to internet connected systems, are now more accessible, and we really have more possible entry points that attackers can leverage to gain access and potentially compromise the system. The last point that we'll look at for really the need or the importance of cyber hygiene is that the human element or personnel are often the weakest point in the security of a facility. And another recent study found that nearly 80% of all insider cybersecurity attacks are unintentional. And so these are things resulting from, for example, employee or contractor negligence, so not following cybersecurity policies and procedures, not following requirements for passwords or updating user accounts. 13% resulted from credential theft, so we can think about falling for phishing emails or having credentials available online that can be collected and aggregated. And so we're seeing that this is really driving the majority of all insider attacks. And the myth that we see at many facilities is that the employees believe that their actions or what they do really is not going to have an impact at the end of the day on security. There's a lot of confidence in automated systems and a belief that those will be sufficient in themselves to detect and protect against cybersecurity attacks. Um, but what we see time and time again is it's really the human element that allows attackers to gain access, and that no amount of countermeasures by themselves are going to be sufficient to protect against those types of attacks. And so with that, we can look at kind of the three different types of insider cybersecurity incidents. So there are malicious attacks where there is an intentional motive to cause harm, as well as a decision to act inappropriately or violate security policies. on the other hand, when there is no motive to cause harms or things that would fall into the unintentional category, we have accidental, where it's not a conscious decision to act inappropriately. Instead, it may be lack of awareness or lack of understanding driving the issue, or negligence, where the personnel would be aware that what they're doing is wrong, or aware that they're violating security policies, but they would still make that decision, not hoping to cause harm, but putting the system in a more vulnerable situation. And so after looking at really the critical role that cyber hygiene plays in addressing and managing cybersecurity risk, we can look a little deeper at what cybersecurity hygiene is. Um, and so as we talked about in the beginning of the presentation, cyber hygiene is a set of basic practices. These are simple things that can be done by all personnel, including both employees and contractors, to really limit the spread of computer viruses or to protect the health of hardware and software for computer-based systems. And so these are, not going to be super challenging or technical activities. The goal is really to make it achievable and something that every employee can do to help really maintain and achieve that baseline level of security. And so when we ask the question, well, what does cybersecurity hygiene look like? There are three main things that we might look at. The first is awareness of potential sources of cybersecurity risk. So things like phishing emails continue to be a major source of compromise for internet connected networks, looking at suspicious websites or web activity, and then looking at the incorrect use of portable media, such as USB devices. And so although phishing emails and websites all are attack vectors that would occur on an internet connected system, and many automation systems are not directly connected to the internet, what we've seen in multiple attacks, including the German steel mill, as well as the Ukrainian power grid attacks, is that often the email accounts of personnel with access to the automation network are a critical first entry point. And attackers can use these to gain access to the enterprise network and from there connect remotely to the automation network. Um, and so we need to be very careful about protecting those accounts. Then from the portable media perspective, um, these devices are often used, even for air gap systems to transfer information and connect to the automation network. And so in that case, this provides a direct pathway for malware to be accidentally loaded onto the system and to spread cybersecurity incidents in that way. The next piece of cyber hygiene is looking at and adopting best practices for security. So making sure that personnel are aware of security requirements, driving them to use strong and unique passwords, to remove any unused accounts. Um, you know, the third part kind of is a subset of the best practices. So thinking about limiting how much personal information is available, so removing unused accounts, removing how much personal information is out there. Um, we can also look at just following general best practices for device management, so making sure that device, personal computers, really any PCs are um, updated and are running the latest supported versions, that antivirus is in place. So all of those best practices also fit into those basic practices that need to be done to achieve cyber hygiene. And so if we take a little bit of a closer look at phishing, we'll see this is something that's been talked about for quite a long time, but unfortunately for the IT people who are tired of talking about it, this is still one of the most frequently used, as well as a very effective method that attackers use to compromise accounts. And so essentially phishing is the use of email to acquire sensitive information, such as passwords, or to trick users into clicking on a link that downloads malware or takes them to a malicious site. And so what we've seen is that without awareness training, that phishing can be very successful in a wide variety of applications. And so a study done found that nearly 38% of employees across really all industries were clicking on phishing links if they had not gone through awareness training. And this number actually got even worse at large manufacturing companies. So we can think about companies who have automation systems that they're operating. And this number was as high as 47%, or nearly half of all employees were clicking on phishing links. And so this just goes to show that it is still very prevalent, that this is really for sites that don't have good awareness, a very easy method to gain that initial access. We're also seeing that there are many different subsets or types of phishing. So we have, um, you know, spear phishing, which looks at gathering information, taking that social media footprint and learning everything they can about, those who they're targeting. We also see whale phishing, or targeting managers or those with higher level access at organizations. And so there are lots of different strategies that are used to try to make the phishing emails more effective. To help employees be better protected against phishing attacks, and to help them get better at detecting a phishing email, there are a couple of best practices that we can look at. The first one is for any sort of external emails, we need employees to be particularly alert and on guard to make sure that this is not a malicious email. Many organizations are now using essentially alert bars where any sort of external email explicitly has a warning identified, and that goes to the receiver of the email. Another important activity is to always check the entire email address. In many cases, the phishing email will attempt to replicate or look similar to a legitimate email address, but it'll always have something wrong with it, whether it is, a the number 1 or an exclamation point instead of an L, some slight misspelling. For example, instead of being at Microsoft.com, we now have security on Microsoft. So we've got, a fake destination, a fake source for that email. The other things that we can sometimes look for are overly generic greetings. So things like "Dear Customer" or the "You have one, click here to redeem" type messages, is that they are very generic and would be aimed to go to many different users to see if any of them are willing to click on those links. In some cases, such as spear phishing, the greetings will be much more targeted, but that's a good thing to be looking at. Another common trend is that phishing emails try to really drive and increase the urgency. So whether it is, asking for, redeem now before something expires, to respond to an immediate request, or to look at some sort of urgent action to prevent loss of access, all of those things are designed to really, get the person reading the email in a state where they're trying to go more quickly. And when we're trying to move fast, it's just human nature that we're more likely to make mistakes. And so they have a much better chance of someone clicking the email in that moment when they feel rushed. And so making sure that employees know to take a step back, carefully review the email before making a decision to click on any links. Another common trend in phishing emails is poor grammar or incorrect spelling. And so this is something that, in the past I thought was more a result of, say, a lack of care going into the phishing emails. But what we've seen over time is that spam filters have specific phrases or words that they look for in order to block emails and identify them as spam, emails that shouldn't be sent through. And what attackers will actually do is they will misspell some of those keywords or change the grammar structure so that it is better able to pass through the filters and be more likely to reach more people. And then the last thing would be to check any email before clicking on them by hovering over the link and seeing, is it linking to the same place that is suggested um, in the mail? Is it something that is on a secure website? So looking to make sure it's at HTTPS instead of HTTP. can really be important for um, you know, making sure that you're going to a secure website and not being directed to a specific or a suspicious web traffic area, or to a download for a malicious program. The next step that we'll look at is really improving the security around portable media, because this is another common way in which malware is introduced unintentionally. And so one of the first things that needs to be trained is to not plug in found USBs or any USB that is lying around. And although a lot of times there's a curiosity to see what's on there, this is a way in which malware has been spread really in many occasions. Um, it's believed that a USB was used to deliver the Stuxnet virus either through the use of a USB drop or through an intentional insider, and it's had an impact in many other attacks as well. The next piece to look at would be to not charge cell phones on automation systems, to really make sure that those are plugged in directly to a power outlet, or many organizations are now having specific charging stations to make it so operators know not to plug their phones into the control system. And this can just spread lots of issues, potential for malware to spread, potential for programs and applications that aren't needed in the control environment to be downloaded. And so that we really need to avoid. Really, any USB or portable media used on the automation system should be dedicated solely for that use and only used for automation system specific applications. And that can again help to limit the spread or limit the potential for a rogue USB to be plugged in. Another potential best practice that can be implemented is to use malware scanning software for USBs. And there are a number of applications out there where essentially you've got a malware scan station where you can plug in the USB and it will get a finger or a thumbprint that says it's been scanned and is secure to use on the network. And it can only be plugged into devices with that software installed. It'll check and make sure that it is up to date. And if it has been plugged into any system other than the controlled automation network or the zone in which it's allowed, then it needs to go back and be scanned to confirm that no malware is present. So those are all best practices that can really help to limit the spread of malware through portable media. In addition to this, we also want to define other best practices for employees to follow to help limit the cybersecurity exposure. And so there are quite a few do's that we want to encourage employees and contractors to do. So things like using strong passwords, removing any sort of unused accounts, maintaining updated devices, so patching operating systems, making sure we're running up-to-date versions of any applications on our network, um, having clear requirements for our adherence to company policies, having consequences if those policies aren't followed. Another study showed that as many as 25% of employees are admitting to ignoring or failing to follow their company security policies. And so really, having and that's the portion that admit it. The actual portion that may not be following the policies could potentially be even higher. So we really want to have a good plan for rollout and adherence to those company policies. We also want to look at limiting the social media footprint, making sure that there is not readily available information that could be used when making a targeted phishing email, or could be used to identify passwords or really gain access to the control network. Um, Another thing that we want to do is we want to empower operators and personnel to be able to report potentially suspicious activity. If there are increased load times on faceplates, if we have unusual email traffic or are seeing unusual network connections, all of these things are reasons that we may want to alert our security team and begin taking actions to prevent the attack. And so having that, unusual detection activity is really an important step of improving awareness. We can also think about, if you are actually getting signs that indicate malware has been downloaded, that is another critical spot where we need operators to feel comfortable reaching out and notifying the cybersecurity team. In terms of the best practices don'ts, we don't want to reuse passwords for multiple accounts. We don't want to have lots of shared administrator accounts, shared accounts with different people where they all know the password. Whatever we can do to limit that helps us to further limit our exposure. Um, Another thing we see is we really don't want to be using personal devices or personal laptops for business activities. And so that study found that over half of employees were using personal equipment for work from home, which further increases the vulnerabilities. That's a device that the organization doesn't really have a way to manage or control the amount of security hardening that's done on it. And this can also be something that has connected to different websites and may be able to provide a pathway for attackers that way. And so for our final step, we will look at implementing cybersecurity hygiene and really think about how can we roll that out effectively and make a program that fits our organization and is going to get us to the right spot. And so the first step as part of that formal plan is to clearly define the cybersecurity hygiene requirements and communicate those to all employees. Next, we want to look at implementing automation-specific awareness training to really tackle the specific concerns of why cybersecurity hygiene is essential for the automation system, how automation systems differ from traditional IT networks, and why we need to be very careful about protecting them. We also want to lead periodic exercises to test the effectiveness of the program, make sure that it's working correctly, as well as to conduct audits and really implement a continuous improvement program. And so if we start with defining and really clearly communicating the responsibilities for cybersecurity, this is something that needs to be made clear to all employees, particularly those with access to the automation system, to really formally define their role in cybersecurity and what sort of hygiene or activities that they are responsible for adhering to. And oftentimes the best or the clearest way to do this is to have some sort of general terms of use policy where all employees would review and accept certain conditions and activities that they are necessary and must follow in order to have access to the system. And really every user of the automation system should go through and formally accept those terms of uses. Um, Additionally, when we're looking at rolling out a program and implementing these requirements, we need to clearly communicate those expectations and the requirements to all of our employees, to our contractors, to make sure that everyone is on the same page and that they know what is expected of them. And then lastly, we can use flyers and bulletins, posted throughout the site to really provide that additional notification, to provide that ongoing awareness and just serve as a reminder that cyber hygiene is something that needs to be implemented. From there, one of the most critical steps is making sure that all employees are enrolled in periodic awareness training to really keep up to date with current trends, make sure that they have gone through that automation specific awareness training so they understand the role of cybersecurity in their environment. In terms of best practices for making that training effectively, we've seen that short modules certainly are better with improving the amount of knowledge transfer and the knowledge retention. We're also looking at using questions to really gauge that understanding to make sure that attention was paid, as well as needs to revalidate and repeat that training on a yearly basis to keep it fresh, to make sure that we keep that ongoing level of focus. And we're also seeing that many organizations are using their learning management systems or LMSs to really organize that training, to share it with employees who need to take it, as well as to track compliance with policies, track completion of who's gone through and done the training to date. And so all of those can really help with the effectiveness of the training and make sure it's rolled out effectively. One thing that exida is pleased to announce, and something that we've been seeing become more and more critical lately, is actually this customized automation-specific awareness training. And so based on customer requests, we have gone ahead and put in a new program for developing customized online self-paced modules that really go into the topics for cybersecurity hygiene in detail. And these are things that can be shared with all employees to really make them familiar and make sure that they are following what they need to from a cyber hygiene perspective. And so the course is set up to be customized so you can really tailor the modules to be included, the topics to be covered to hit the things that are going to speak most to your organization, that are going to be helpful for securing your systems. And so that's something that we've seen to work really well and be quite an effective way to tackle it. Some things that we do include with this approach is the ability to directly interface with many LMS systems, as well as really creating those questions for comprehension assessment to make sure that personnel are not just clicking through, that they understand and have completed that training. And so if this is something where you would be interested in learning a little bit more about it, please don't hesitate to reach out and I can share some additional details. And really, regardless of which approach we take or what training we implement, we need to monitor and check the effectiveness of that awareness training. And one of the best ways to do that is through periodic exercises. And so on the phishing side, internally run phishing campaigns can be used to track improvements on awareness and essentially see, are employees getting better at not clicking phishing links? And so what was found in the phishing study was that that extremely high 47% for manufacturers was able to be reduced by a factor of 10 and got as low as 5% with consistent training. And so that goes to show not only how effective training can be, but also the need for monitoring and really making sure that we are on the right path, that the amount of personnel falling for phishing schemes is going lower. A similar type of activity can also be done with USB drops. There are a series of test programs that can be installed that essentially will lock a user's system and let them know that they need to see the IT team to have that restored. Now with these really tests or exercises to see how effective the awareness training was, it's also very important that there are consistent consequences defined for policy violations. Now, typically for one or two policy violations, this will look like more frequent training requirements, more frequent meetings with the IT team to discuss awareness. But if there are repeated and really a high number of attempts, we're seeing that many automation systems are having this go up to a higher level of consequences, even as high as potential termination for employees who are continually refusing to adhere to good cybersecurity practices. Another activity that can be very helpful from the exercise standpoint is to conduct tabletop reviews, practice the incident response procedure, get familiar with what that suspicious activity is, and make sure operators are comfortable reporting it. It's also a good opportunity to gather feedback and really use that as an input into our continuous improvement approach. And so our 4 steps in continuous improvement are to plan, do, check, and act. And so our plan comes down to our policy and procedure rollout, to specifically defining what our cyber hygiene goals are, what the activities are that each employee needs to follow. From the do, we've got the actual rollout. So going through and conducting that cybersecurity awareness training, implementing the program to really make sure that the hygiene recommendations are being followed. We can look at the performance monitoring. So what are our phishing campaigns and our USB drops? What are they showing us about the implemented cybersecurity? When we conduct compliance audits, are we seeing lots of non-compliances? Are we seeing employees that are not following the procedures, and what sort of corrective actions can we take there? And then the act is we gather all of that feedback and we look at, well, what can we do to improve our policies, improve how we are conducting our training, or take any sort of corrective actions in what we're defining for cyber hygiene. And so with that, we can really help to limit the risks for cybersecurity. And so we saw how critical cyber hygiene was to protecting against the severe types of consequences that can occur in industrial systems, looking at how the human element is really that weak point or a potential entry point, and cyber hygiene is necessary, or is that critical step for reducing the amount of unintentional cybersecurity incidents. We looked at those basic practices that should be followed, as well as a strategy for having that rollout, having that consistent approach. And so I did see a number of questions come in throughout the webinar. So if you do have any others, now is a good time to put those in the chat. I'm going to go through and look at a couple of quick outro slides, and really look at what upcoming training offerings we have. And so we do have a number of new courses that we're offering, including the FSE 001 or Introduction to Functional Safety course. This is really meant to be the cyber hygiene equivalent for safety, looking at those basic core fundamental concepts and getting that initial introduction covered. We've also recently recorded our FSE 110 Machine Functional Safety course, as well as a number of new OEM-based functional safety courses. On the cybersecurity side, we have the customized modules that we can develop for the awareness training, as well as the CS 102 course, which is a 2-day course that really goes into the full automation lifecycle. And in addition to our online self-paced offerings, we also have a number of upcoming live online courses for a mix of functional safety, alarm management, and cybersecurity activities. And the one course that I really want to highlight here is coming up over 2 weeks in December. This is a 4-day course split up into multiple half days. And I'll actually be teaching this section for CS 100, which is our newly developed flagship course for cybersecurity, where we're really taking our CS 102 course that's currently 2 days and expanding that to go into more detail throughout the life cycle, as well as include more interactive workshop problems to really help those roles that are working directly with cybersecurity develop that core competence and really develop those key skills. And so if you enjoyed today's webinar and want to get updates on similar presentations, please don't hesitate to follow exida on social media to get access to those updates. Also, if there is a question or interest in training and we don't have a chance to talk about it on this webinar, don't hesitate to send me an email and I'll be happy to get back to you as soon as I can. We also have links to a number of other reference material, as well as the YouTube channel where the webinars are uploaded. And so now to go through and just address the few questions we had come in. So the first question I see here is that, today we looked at cybersecurity hygiene for asset owners or for operating facilities. Is there an equivalent for equipment manufacturers or those developing system components for automation systems? So thank you for the question. This is definitely something that is important And we can think about how there are general awareness activities that should be completed for equipment manufacturers as well. And so this is something that we would look at more in our CS201 or our basically software development and having a secure software development lifecycle approach. Um, and this looks at not only secure coding practices, but what are those basic cybersecurity activities that need to be completed by the manufacturer to really make sure that our system is achieving its goals and is going to be designed in a secure way, give us a secure starting point for the overall system. All right, so the second question I'm seeing here is, how long is the typical awareness training? Um, and so this is something that can depend a little bit on the audience. And one of the reasons that we like to be able to customize the modules and really make them fit. But what we would say is that the total awareness sessions typically run around an hour. They can be longer if there are some other core concepts that you want to go through and share with a wider audience. So typically in the ballpark of 1 to 3 hours, but making sure that they're broken up into bite-sized modules that are easy to go through. Right. So it looks like those are our 2 questions for the webinar. Again, please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any other questions. But my name is Patrick O'Brien, and today we went through and looked at cyber hygiene, what it is, and also how to implement it. So thank you very much for your time and have a great rest of your day.